Welcome to our Digital Fridays event on next generation dissertations. While we're waiting on folks to trickle in, I wanted to invite everyone to introduce themselves in the chat if you feel so moved. Please introduce yourself with your name, your pronouns, where you're zooming in from, what program area, or what you're getting your degree in, what you're studying. And our icebreaker question is to describe your favorite movie badly. So again, your name, pronouns, where you're zooming in from, your degree or program area, and to describe your favorite movie badly. I also wanted to let folks know that today's event is being recorded. If that's something that you're not comfortable with, to please leave your camera off. And we'll probably get started in the next minute or so. Maybe I'll introduce myself. My name is Sean Lin. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm one of the co-directors of HASTAC Scholars. I'm zooming in from Brooklyn, Southwest Brooklyn, Sunset Park. I am a PhD student at the CUNY Graduate Center. I'm working on a PhD in geography, which is in the Earth and Environmental Science program in our school. To describe a movie badly, maybe I'll do that in the chat. But if you're joining us a little late, please introduce yourself in the chat with your name, your pronouns, where you're zooming in from today, your degree or program area, and then describing a movie that you love badly. Yeah, welcome. For folks who maybe are new to the HASTAC Scholar space, HASTAC is an acronym that stands for the Humanities, Arts, Science, Technology. Oh man, I'm blanking on it right now. Humanities, Arts, Science, Technology, something in collaboratory. This is terrible. But we are the oldest academic social network. We have over 18,000 members on our academic network. I'd invite you all to check out our website, haystack.org, to participate in discussions over there. One of the programs something that we do is we run a program called HASTAC Scholars, in which we run active programs that engage undergraduate and graduate students in discourse around digital humanities. Some of those things that we're doing involve a collaborative book review, in which this year, I think 24 scholars have signed up to collaboratively review a book and kind of share their reviews on it over the course of the semester, and we'll publish it at the end of the semester. And then the other program that we're running is Digital Fridays, which is a regular webinar series that's conceived and led by our scholars. All of our events are conceived, led, and organized by HASTAC Scholars and presented in a space like this. So yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about HASTAC Scholars if anybody has any questions. But without further ado, because we have a fully packed agenda today, I'm going to pass it over to Katina Rogers. Katina is the founder of InkCap Consulting and the author of Putting the Humanities PhD to Work, Thriving in and Beyond the Classroom, which was published by Duke University Press in 2020. With over a decade of experience as a researcher, administrator, and educator, Dr. Rogers works with colleges and universities to design and implement creative, sustainable, and equitable structures for graduate education. She was an integral part of the HASTAC team for 7 years and holds a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Colorado at Boulder.
Thank you, Sean. It's so nice to be here today and to see so many names and faces that I know. I actually feel surprisingly nervous to be on this side of the equation for a HASTAC Scholars event, but it's also really a pleasure to be here. So as Sean mentioned, I worked closely with HASTAC for the last 7 years and have just recently stepped out on my own. And I think one of the things that I'm feeling really excited about right now is the through line that I can see between the work that I was able to do at HASTAC and at the Futures Initiative and the Graduate Center, and the way that that work has evolved and shifted and grown and adapted over time, and especially through this next generation dissertations project that I've been working on with Glenn Wright at Syracuse University and a number of other colleagues. I am just delighted to be able to share that project here, and especially to be able to share the work of the scholars who are featured on the website. They're doing such amazing, interesting, creative work. I hope people have already had a chance to take a look at the website. And if not, I'll share a link in just a moment. But we've done a number of interviews with many of the folks who are here today. We've got links out to their work shared on the site. But we also have a number of tools available for you if you're thinking about doing similar types of work yourself. We have evaluation tools and rationales for why this type of work matters, why it matters in the context of the importance of humanities education as something that serves as a public good. But most of all, what I love about these conversations is that the work is so good, and it's interesting and it's beautiful, and it helps to rekindle the spark of curiosity and insight and pleasure that can be a part of the best scholarship. So each of our speakers is going to introduce themselves and their projects, and then we'll open the floor for a conversation. Since we are a fairly large group today, I would welcome people to leave questions in the chat throughout the hour. I will try to keep an eye on that, and we'll grab questions to circle back to at the end. And if you'd like to speak during the Q&A, please just use the raise hand function so that we can see you. So our speakers today will be Sohini, Sonia Estema, Jesse Merandy, Ivan Gonzalez-Soto, and Justin Schell. Kay is going to get us started. I'll pass it to you.
Hi, I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Can you see that? Great. Okay, so my name is Sohini, and I'm a final year PhD candidate at Startup University, where I literally just finished drawing my doctoral dissertation as a comic that engages the sociopolitical through the lens of the personal. And I use comics to draw attention to systemic and interconnected issues pertaining to race, gender, disability, and environmental inequality. I started drawing comics seriously only about 3 to 4 years back, like around the time I started drawing my dissertation. I used to be a drawer as a kid, but I had this teacher who was not very interested in teaching me how to draw. Like, he was interested in teaching me how to imitate famous paintings, and that was just not my thing. So I kind of like gave up on it fairly soon. But drawing comics, let alone kind of like drawing comics in an academic setting, didn't really occur to me before I encountered Nick Susanis's Unflattening, which also started as a doctoral dissertation. And the first time I read about Unflattening was for some time in 2016. And I was in a master's program then, and the very concept of using comics as a method to think about, to think in and communicate with was really exciting to me. Here in this picture, if you can see, I kind of like do a visual coding of Unflattening. So the medium was important to me for 2 key reasons. Firstly, the more I thought about how comics appeal to social justice, or how they accommodate narratives by and about people who have been historically pushed to the margins, and how they help readers reconsider social biases, the more I was compelled to think about modes of production. And I figured that if I wanted to write about comics as literatures of resistance, I needed to ask questions about accessibility and readability. And also, as a woman of color and an immigrant working in this format, I'm not only able to combine my socio-ethical obligations with my scholarship, but it allowed me to do so in a materially accessible form and a qualitatively accessible language. So here I contributed to this book called COVID Chronicles, which was published by Graphic Monday last year, where I talk about the anti-Asian racism, anti-Blackness, and COVID and such. But it was really not before I actually started drawing my dissertation did I realize exactly how generative the comics medium would be for me. When I wrote the chapter Breathless, which focuses on how environmental sustainability is a disability and racial justice issue, I figured out that I can actually combine creative data visualization with narrative. An excerpt from this chapter was recently published in the Nib. You can read it online, actually. But to give you some examples of what this looks like in practice, here's an example. So using the visual interface of the medium, I try to show the disparities in New York's infrastructure. For example, like when the tropical storm Elsa passed through New York, it flooded parts of the city, and it was very jarring to see how the subways in the area lying in Washington Heights which is usually lower income than the citywide median and predominantly Black, were submerged in waist-deep water, whereas subway stops in Upper East Side, like the Lexington 63rd and such, which has a significantly lower elevation level, were just fine and not waterlogged. So this is what I try to capture in the image here, along with the data visualization of the rising sea levels around New York. So yeah, essentially my point was to kind of like point to the major discrepancy in infrastructure based on demographics. Another example is this visualization pertaining to the water crisis in the Lake Mead, which is the largest reservoir in the United States. And as of 2021, the federal government has issued the first ever water crisis alert on the Colorado River. So in this visualization here, I explain how Lake Mead was last considered full all the way back in 1983. And I also show how the current deficit, the water deficit, is as high as Statue of Liberty without its base. And then with the help of these isometric cubes, I try to explain the effect the water shortage will have on people in Arizona, California, Nevada, who depend on it for electricity, water, and farmers who depend on it for irrigating about 5.5 million acres of land, as well as the adverse impact it will have on wildlife in the area. Recently, I've also been using this kind of data visualization to show the increase in heat waves, droughts, wildfires, to make a case for climate action beyond minor individual adjustments that cannot possibly offset global emissions sufficiently. I also make a case for why comics are well suited to creating and engaging public discourse on these pressing issues by citing the increasing popularity of comics, both in terms of the market size as well as cultural recognition, as can be inferenced from all the Pulitzers, MacArthur's, national awards that comics has won over the last few years. So here I kind of like point to both like the increase in market size, as in like how comics are, like increasingly read in schools and increasingly bought, and also like the kind of awards and the major cultural recognitions that it has won. It's on my website if you want to check it out in detail. But yeah, I think I might be nearly close to dying. So I'll wrap up the short piece with this short piece I did on the affordances of comics using the DeLuca effect, where basically several moments of time come together, compressed into a single image. So here I use the effect to explore the various possibilities of the medium, and especially in graphic medicine, in autobiographies, in documentaries, quality communication, and so on. These are actually like small examples of like visual metaphors within the image, but I can't, for some reason, I cannot like zoom in the image. So sorry about that. But that's all for my end, and thank you for listening.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Kay. And it's really exciting to think that you're going to be defending in just a month, and I'm excited to see where your work goes from there. And I know from talking with your advisor, it sounds like your committee is really supportive, so it's fantastic. Sonia, I'm going to pass it to you next, please.
All right, can you hear me? Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia Estema, and before I introduce myself, I have to say I absolutely am already in love with Kay's work. I just recently became familiar with her work, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. I'm in love with it. I've been to your website a couple of times and just love what you're doing. My inspiration for my dissertation came from Nick Suzanis, who also wrote a dissertation in comic format. And the whole premise of Suzanis' dissertation was questioning the supremacy of writing in academia, in academic writing, and specifically in dissertation writing, and questioning that supremacy and looking at alternatives. And so just by looking at Kay's work, it brings back memories of me going through the process of questioning, what is it that we're trying to do? Who are we trying to reach? And I think, so my dissertation turned out to be, I ended up writing my dissertation on multimodal dissertations. So multimodal meaning making and the dissertation writing. And I ended up doing a case study. And one of the cases I looked at is with us today, Justin Schell, and I know that he's going to be introducing his work in just a little bit, but really beginning to even question, who are we writing for? Why are we doing this? Who is going to be reading? Traditionally, I think one of the big jokes of dissertation writing is that nobody's going to read it. And even your advisors may end up not reading your whole dissertation from beginning to end. But once you start adding comics, once you start adding graphics, once you start adding videos, then it perhaps becomes more accessible to a wider audience who can understand what you say and who can understand what you're doing. And so it opens up the possibilities both for the writer and for the reader. And so creating a space where different people can begin to have a voice. And I think that was perhaps for me the biggest lesson and the biggest message that I got out of the process of working on my dissertation is to really start to create new spaces where more people can get engaged in the conversation. And for me, that alone is worth the work, worth the trouble. Still see a big need for questioning the format and where are the rubrics, where are the resources. So if I want to do this, unfortunately, I'm not an artist. I'm not yet able to draw as Kay or Suzanne's did. So in my dissertation, I ended up using video, which I'm also not a videographer. I'm not in video production. So I had to learn how to work with video, how to edit video in order to be able to interpolate video and writing into my dissertation. So many questions that come up as you begin to explore different mediums, different modes of communication, and different ways of what could or what should a dissertation look like. I see that somebody put the link up on the chat. I think Katina just did. So just my name, if you're curious, my dissertation can be found at my website, which is just my first name, last name.com, soniaestema.com. You can take a look at the dissertation, and I'm just really excited to be part of the conversation. Now, I just completed, not too long ago, my dissertation. I finished in December of 2020, so just about over a year ago. And in my work currently, I do faculty development. I work at a large language institute in Monterey, California. And my function currently, I'm originally from Brazil. I came to teach Portuguese, and now I do faculty training. So most of the people I work with, we are all from other countries. In English, we work in English, and in English is my second language. So I work with this on a daily basis and trying to open up these spaces for other colleagues who are working not in their native language and for whom writing is extremely difficult and painful. So how can we create more opportunities for people to be able to engage in the conversation? I think that's all I had.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I'm not at all surprised to hear Nick Susanis' name coming up already as an inspiration and a support, both for you and for Kay, and I'm sure for others. Thank you, that's fantastic. I'm gonna pass it over now to Jesse Morandy. Oh, thanks for dropping those links in, Jesse.
Yeah, no problem. First of all, thanks again for having us today. This is a great event, and I am really excited whenever I get to share this project and join this group of folks who are gathered here today, because it really is something that I wish I had had when I started on this kind of journey long ago, to make a dissertation that was not a traditional monograph. So I hope that this proves useful to a lot of you out there and helps you dream bigger about what you're doing and finding the right kinds of scholarship that work for you as you go forward in your careers and or whatever you're pursuing. So my name is Jesse Merandy. I work at Bard Graduate Center here in New York City. It's a small advanced degree granting institution where the students study object material culture, amongst other things. And I have been working here for about 5 years. And part of the dissertation, the great thing about the dissertation for me was that the work I did on that led to my hire here and has continued to kind of create a feedback between the work I'm doing on my own and the work I do professionally. So it was a kind of challenge to do this project, but I'm really thankful in the end that I undertook that challenge, because it did benefit me in my career and my life. So the project I built was called Vanishing Leaves. It was the first all digital dissertation at the CUNY Graduate Center at CUNY at large. What I was interested in as a primary focus was thinking about ways that I could create methods that could engage students and learners of any age or any ilk to connect with writers. One of the things I've been really interested in like reading older literature, 19th century literature, particularly for me and Walt Whitman, was that I really wanted to create important personal connections between the works and the users or the readers. So there was a lot of thinking went into how can I create methods that are non-traditional, that can really be personal, that can engage users, that can create that connection in ways that a monograph might not. So what I did was using a platform called Eris, which was developed at the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus. I built a location-based mobile experience. And what that basically is using the GPS functionality of mobile devices, of phones or iPads, and high-speed internet connection. Essentially what my main driving idea was to bring people to places that would connect to Walt Whitman in this case, and where he lived and worked and wrote in Brooklyn Heights. So the mobile app would take you around and you would be led to different locations. And while you were at those locations, you were able to interact with characters, Walt Whitman and other characters, and trying to solve this mystery of who was trying to eradicate Walt Whitman from human memory. So the project encompassed a lot of different aspects. I was working on not only the mobile app, but here I'm just going to quickly screen share. This is the project website. So in support of my work that I did building this narrative and gameplay experience, I also created a website to house all the scholarship and the readings, the audio files, everything that went into the actual game. You could also access through this website. So I tried to create multiple paths to get to this information depending on who you were, what devices you were using, and where you were coming from. Initially, I had built this as just a location-based experience, which meant you had to go to the actual location. But through guidance and through conversations with my advisor, Matt Gold, I was able to also think about this as an experience that anybody could undertake from any location. So I essentially built the game twice, from one to be played remotely and one to be played at location. You'll see here I have a lot of different writing. So the scholarship was intensive in the back and encompassed a lot of the history of Brooklyn Heights and of Walt Whitman in those locations. That information was all embedded in the game and was delivered to players as they went through the game experience. So in the end, I really was trying to find this way that would capture the kind of imagination of learners in a different way. As I built the game, I also was learning in a different way and was kind of provoked to think about scholarship in ways that were not traditional, which was really an exciting adventure kind of for me. I was going out into Brooklyn Heights learning. I was then coming back to these locations to then like re-encounter the literature I had been reading from a different perspective. And I was baking all of those experiences that I was having into the work I was doing. So a lot of this has gone into my white paper, which is the first link I posted there. So you can read my white paper, which is also a kind of necessary addendum to the work I did. So as with these kind of next-gen dissertations, you're also often required to do work above and beyond that tackle a lot of the questions people might have about how did this thing happen and how do you do this thing and what is this thing. And so a lot of work went in also with Matt Gold to in my dissertation committee to think about ways that I can make sure that this experience was sustainable. So again, a whole other thing we can talk about later, how do we sustain these projects that are not typical print works. And so a lot of work went into thinking about that too. So if you want to learn more about the game and the experience, you can go to the white paper, which is downloadable through this site, and find out more about the kind of a more detailed look at the scholarship that went in and the thinking that influenced the building of the game, other projects that were used as inspiration, other dissertations that were used as inspiration. And hopefully this can be a tool for you to think about your own projects moving forward. I was really excited about this panel because there's so many different kinds of modes of thinking about this capstone project of, the PhD degree. And so I really love to see that there's so many different paths that you can take, really finding your voice, finding what interests you and what drives you. For me, I was really into mobile devices as learning tools. I was into place-based learning. I was thinking about different ways of connecting with Whitman. So Whitman isn't baked into all of this as well. And I hope you all get a chance to check it out. And once again, thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Jesse. It's nice to hear some of the genealogies of this work at the Graduate Center too. I know we've got some Grad Center folks who are here. And I'm really glad that you raised the questions of both access and preservation, because I think those are two really important topics to consider when thinking about this type of work. Next, I'm going to pass it over to Ivan. Ivan, let's see, where did you go on my screen? There you are. Are you all set? Great.
All set. Okay, and I just dropped a link in. If anyone wants to kind of follow along while I'm doing a screen share, you can check it out. That page is on my website and it is a work in progress. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Merced in California. I'm a soon-to-be PhD candidate, and the page I'm about to share with you is some of the illustrations that I've been working on for my dissertation, specifically a comic book, a community-engaged comic book that I was a part of over the pandemic, and I'll share the kind of most recent adaptation of my history of my dissertation work. But essentially on this page, I'm looking at sequential art, so communicating research through comics or like a graphic novel format. And like Sonia mentioned, I'm writing this social history, this community history of the place I grew up in, and I don't expect anyone to read a dissertation length paper. Especially, I'm trying to reach mostly an audience off campus. And so when I first started thinking about sequential art to communicate research, I thought this would be a way to kind of bring in my artistic kind of background to something that I'm doing for, in my PhD program. And so the first example on here is called Thirsty for Change. It was an effort to kind of talk about water governance in California, drinking water issues, and how someone might get involved with the way their water is managed. And this is specifically for California, but I think it could be applied to other areas, other unincorporated communities in the US. And it's available for free. You can download a copy on eScholarship. This was originally part of a program, a grant-funded program where I was going to, go to different communities in California and present this data, bar graphs, information, these numbers. And then the pandemic happened and we couldn't do these public presentations, in-person kind of talks, recruitment and things like that. So we had to kind of brainstorm, and on a short time frame, we got creative and made up a fictional town that would represent kind of rural California. It's called the city of Del Agua, and there's a family that kind of starts wondering, like, why is our drinking water polluted? And they start asking questions, they start getting involved. And this was put together with a legal team through a nonprofit organization in the Central Valley. So if you check out the whole comic, there's like resources in the back on how to kind of go about asking questions and getting some of these issues solved, in your community. It's also in English and Spanish. I was trying to reach both English and Spanish audience members and speaking audience members. And so this was a way to kind of communicate information quickly and effectively, I think, to a broad audience, both on and off campus. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. And this is kind of the most recent work. I added a watermark on here just less than an hour ago, but this is kind of the graphic novel adaptation of my dissertation. My dissertation work is a social history of southernmost California's Imperial Valley. So this area, this rural region of California along the US-Mexico border. And this is like the opening to my prospectus. So it's essentially a reflection of my childhood, kind of growing up and not being able to make sense of this place around me. And the only way I could really make sense of that in my adult life was kind of looking at this like long legacy of conquest through agribusiness and like these mega farms in the region. And so the dissertation kind of pulls language from my opening section. I want to just share this because it doesn't really talk too much about my research here, but it kind of gives you a glimpse of what this childhood version is kind of thinking. And these are kind of just closer images. These are both pixel and vectors. It's set in the 1990s, and I'm essentially riding in the car, thinking for better or for worse, growing up in the Imperial Valley shaped my worldview. Aridity, agriculture, and aqueducts were these prominent features on the land, and they imposed upon me. They were a paradox of a world in which water was king, which is the part of the working title of my dissertation. And I start to think like nothing really seems remarkable. Everything looks boring around me as a kid. Nothing makes sense until I later in life started thinking about why this place exists the way it does. So there's questions about history. There's questions drawing from environmental studies, ethnic studies, geography, and it's an interdisciplinary program. This will be a way to communicate my work to folks back home. And at the moment it's in English, but I will be also making a Spanish version to reach more folks back home. It'll be digital, but I'm going to see if in the future there's some sort of funding that could help me kind of print this and distribute this for free in California, but especially in my community. So I'll kind of leave that there. This page is work in progress. So if you check back later with the link I shared, you might see other pages. Like I mentioned, I'm soon to be a PhD candidate, and I'm planning to kind of wrap this project up along with my dissertation spring 2024. And so that's kind of all I've got to share here. So I'm going to stop my screen share.
Thank you so much. I love seeing that. I just was reflecting as you were sharing that, Yvonne, how powerful this presentation of scholarship is. I mean, for all of you who have spoken so far, the things that you're sharing are not things that I ever would have pictured when I thought about what scholarship looked like. And I think about the ways that I was socialized in the early days of my own graduate education as to what the boundaries of that scholarly space were. And they were quite narrow, and this breaks those wide open. And I think it also makes me think a lot about teaching and the ways in which scholarship that's public facing or intended for a different audience than a purely departmental based audience sometimes has an illusion of simplicity that is very, very difficult to actually construct, and that there's so much that goes into the visual impact, the scholarly background that's there, the political and socioeconomic components that you're thinking about, and all of that can be in a few cells of images. So I love seeing these. I'm not an artist at all, and it's really powerful to see these all of these great examples. Justin Schell is going to wrap up our showcase. Justin, can I pass it to you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Katina. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So Justin Schell, I direct the Shapiro Design Lab at the University of Michigan Library. But I pulled up the dissertation that I did. This was back in 2019, 2013, a project called We Rock Long Distance, which was a multimodal dissertation that incorporated audio, video, and photos into this online presence. It focuses on immigrant, refugee, and diasporic hip hop in Minnesota. A lot of people know that there's a thriving hip hop community in the Twin Cities, and that there are very large immigrant, refugee, diasporic populations, but very few people knew about how those two intersected. And so that was my project essentially. And the reason for wanting to do this online, there's a bunch of different lineages from getting the camera in my hand for an unrelated project and realizing, hey, I want to make a documentary, to the longstanding grumpiness of like, why do I have to have a CD separate from the public, the printed thing that I have? You know, we have the internet now, we can do this. Of course, there brings up lots of preservation challenges, which we can talk about as well. So this was also part of a feature-length documentary. So the dissertation focuses on one artist who is conventionally from Ghana, named Manifest, and then the other two artists, one was again from, in quotation marks, Puerto Rico, and one from Thailand, who was a Hmong MC and spoken word artist, community organizer. And so looking at how they related to each other, how they expressed their ideas of belonging in music and lyrics, and then also traveling with them to their quote unquote original homes and seeing how they connected, reconnected, didn't connect with people there as well. And so with this, so essentially there are embedded audio and video clips here within the piece. And if you go to the University of Minnesota digital repository, you'll see a PDF with a bunch of play triangles because there was no way to actually get these to be in a PDF. Or there was a way, but it would have been many, many gigs and no fun to deal with at all. And so, so this has gone through some growing pains as well, even after in sort of the afterlife of this, where the repository for all of the audio, because the university library repository couldn't do any embedded media. And so I couldn't use that. And so all of these, I think, are on my personal Vimeo account, which is not the greatest, but I also know that that's like Vimeo going away is a bigger sign of things. And I have all these things backed up and I have a backup plan in case Vimeo goes away, but all the audio was in a different repository at the University of Minnesota. And they changed basically platforms to HTML5 and everything broke. So I had to go back in and redo all of the embeds and things like that. So there still is work that needs to be done on this sort of ongoing work. I do have some, some like digitally preserved like web recorder files for this and things like that, and to sort of give it its best shot at digital preservation, sort of forever or 10 years, whatever comes first. But yeah, excited to talk with everyone about, their own processes, some of the roadblocks that they encountered. I'm happy to share the ones that I encountered, and often through the bureaucracies of graduate school dissertation requirements and things like that. But yeah, this is the project, and then the documentary, and both of these are available online. This is you can watch the documentary here as well. So yeah, that's what I have, and I'm looking forward to talking with y'all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Justin. One of the things that I really love about this particular group of presenters is that we've got folks at many different stages of their careers. So we've got Justin and Jesse, who defended a few years ago and who are into the kinds of interesting jobs that I'm sure many folks here might be thinking about for their own futures. Sonia, whose dissertation defense is probably fresher in mind, and Yvonne and Kay, who are nearing that process now. So for folks among the HASTAC scholars who may be working on your own dissertations or thinking about the possibilities that are open for you in the future, there's a really great group of people here who can offer their advice and their perspectives based on their own experiences. Before we open up to audience questions, which I've been noting down the ones that people are asking in the chat, thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Glenn Wright for the first question. Glenn is the project director at University of Syracuse, who has been spearheading the entire Next Generation Dissertations project. Glenn, do you want to say a couple words and then ask the first question?
Sure, thanks, Katina. Maybe just super quickly, because I want to continue with this great discussion, just to kind of indicate a little bit about the background of this project. It started with an NEH Next Gen Humanities PhD planning grant that Syracuse University got in 2018. And one of the 4 projects that we settled on as being on our main foci for that work was something around alternate format dissertations. And it quickly became clear, I think it was clear from the start, that that was going to mean a website resource toolkit. So I want to thank the people who were involved in the planning of that, and also particularly Chris Flanagan, who was a postdoc we were able to hire with some leftover money from the grant plus some money at the graduate school. And Chris was the person who really first put together the architecture and really started turning it from a list of things that we wanted and thought would be useful into something that could be a navigable website. And he and I did some of the initial interviews, including with Jesse Morandy. But we were going to run out of time. So we decided to bring, in order to make this project fit within Chris's time frame with us, we brought Katina on as a consultant. And that was really the key toward making this into the actually existing website that I really hope you will all go and check out. If you haven't already, Katina and I both dropped the link in the chat. It's got all kinds of great resources that Katina indicated at the top. And who knows, given the HASTAC group here. Oh, and I want to give thanks to Sean Lynn and also HASTAC organizers for seeing fit to include this program in the Digital Fridays series. It's the ideal group for bringing this effort to everyone's attention. So thanks to everyone at HASTAC. And so the first question, I'll confess, Katina, that I have not queued up the first one. So if you want to go ahead and ask it, so I don't skip anybody, let's do that.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, and I thought if you had anything that you wanted to ask the speakers, we could.
Oh, I see.
You could have your own question as well, but there's lots of great questions coming through in the chat. So maybe we'll turn to those first, and we'll see where the conversation goes. One thing that I think I'll group together, there's a couple of different questions about support. How to help faculty and advisors to understand and support these formats, how you find funding, and what resources you were able to draw on your campuses. I think that all those are connected. I would welcome any of you to respond to those questions about where you've been able to find support, what you might advise to faculty who are supporting students in these kinds of projects, and whether this had an impact on things like your funding or other opportunities that have been available to you through your programs. Yeah, Jesse, go ahead.
I will talk specifically about the institutional support I had. So when I started my dissertation, I had a different chair of my committee. And one of the things that became apparent as I went on, that it was difficult to explain what I was doing. And I had a very enthusiastic and supportive head of my committee actually at that time, but she felt like she couldn't speak to the parts that were digitally related. So it really forced me to rethink my plan for that committee. And once I had switched to Matt Gold as my support and being the kind of head of my committee, it really opened up a lot of channels, because Matt was threaded through all the DH operations, nearly all of them at the Graduate Center, and at CUNY he was a player in a lot of other parts of the institution as well. So when we were trying to get support from both our academic program and from the institution at large, he was really helpful as an advocate, moving forward, pushing the project, and making sure that there wasn't a point when I got towards the end where somebody would come back to me and say, you know what, this is too out there. We can't do something like a mobile app for your dissertation. It's not going to work for us. So we made sure to get buy-in, and Matt was really helpful for that. And then I'll just say at the other end, in the archival process, Stephen Klein is here with me today, and Roxanne Shirazi was one of the other librarians I worked with, thinking about how to archive that and ingest it into the systems that were not built to ingest other kinds of dissertations was a challenge. And without their help on the other end, it would have been very difficult to think of how to submit this thing that was also not a traditional dissertation and just giving a, paper to bind or to give a document to submit to ProQuest. This was much more intricate, and there were many facets, including the website backend, all of the graphic work I did, the script I wrote, the websites I built just to house the white paper. So all of that had to get ingested, and it was a complex undertaking. And without that institutional support, it would have been very challenging. So I think from getting buy-in from your program, your committee, making sure you have the right people on your committee, and also making sure that you know your librarians and the people you're going to have to work with through the full life of the project to getting yourself to the finish line is really important.
One thing that I've been thinking about through this whole project in terms of faculty support of students is one of the first things that I did in starting to work with Syracuse was to interview some folks to see what kinds of materials they had available in their departments, written materials about the expectations around dissertations. And in the humanities, there were not many. And so I think that there's often this burden that's placed on students to demonstrate that a non-standard dissertation is as rigorous as a traditional one. And yet rigorous is doing a lot of tacit work there, because if the goals and the objectives are not articulated somewhere, then the student ends up pushing against nothing. There's nothing for them to really show, if this is what a dissertation expects, here's how mine accomplishes that goal. So for faculty, one challenge that I would issue to folks is to really look at what guidelines your department already offers to students for any type of dissertation, and think about what parts within that can be abstracted so that they're not format dependent. And that's one of the things that we tried to do on the evaluation tab of the website, is really think about, like, what are the goals of what you're trying to do, what a student is trying to do in passing this point of their scholarly career, and how many of those things are dependent on the way in which that work is done. I would argue that not many are format dependent. And so I would suggest starting there, and both with this and with anything that's like career oriented, I really encourage faculty also to start with a question oriented approach, so that you are starting from a place of curiosity and hearing what the student is hoping to do with this particular type of work. And Annie, because I know you, and I know that this was your question, I would imagine that is very deeply embedded in the kind of approach that you have. But that would be my 2 cents. I'd be curious to hear from others on the panel about things that you found that were really helpful from your faculty members, either your advisors or others on your committee. Justin?
Yeah, I think now I sort of have both sides of this, because even this coming Monday, I'm helping with a graduate student consultation who is trying to do a non-traditional dissertation. And so I have sent her the website, and it will be definitely talking with her about that. But, for me, the biggest block was my first advisor wasn't interested in me doing this. And then I had to change advisors. And once I did, he was totally fine with it. And things went pretty smoothly in terms of what I would say, like an ideological front. And then from there, it was more the technical thing, but definitely talking to librarians. If your librarians for your department, librarian for your department, or at a small institution may not know, there are plenty of folks out there who do know about this, and that they could connect to, and different people. I was lucky to be at a large university that had a digital repository and had multiple actually repositories that I could look into. And so being able to understand the multiple dimensions of this from, as other people have said, like, the preservation aspects of this, how that will work, within university structures, but also live outside of university structures, and being able to recognize, and like finding your crew of other people who are interested in this kind of stuff and building that sort of momentum. And so now we're talking with the graduate school here at Michigan about what kinds of things can be changed, and they are not responding. So if you know anyone there, we should talk to them. But and so trying to figure out a way that oh my God, Kat's gonna jump on the laptop. Please don't jump on the laptop. So just that sort of support where it's like very, very local in terms of the community of people that are most sort of responsible for helping you bring your dissertation into the world, but then also this larger community of people that you can connect with as part of events like these, as well as like the wider community of experts who want to help you succeed.
That's great, Justin. Thank you. It must be so interesting to be seeing it from the other side too. Another question that came through in the chat is for Kay and Yvonne in particular. Sam asks, the comic book format seems to break through academic conventions when it comes to non-traditional dissertations. What is it about this format that you think enables this openness?
So I'll just take a shot at it. I'm not sure exactly what is it, but I feel like comics definitely have a history of doing really revolutionary work, because what with the history of political cartooning and such, we already have a lot of creators who are, like writing works that can be categorized as comics as resistance. For example, like we have Sako's work, and even like Pegdell writing queer literature, and Mouse, which is, like the topic of banned books and all that stuff. But yeah, so I feel like we have a lot to look up to, and also it's just such a versatile medium. There's just so much you can do with it. I just feel like once you start exploring with it, you can no longer be bound by academic conventions. There's just no way to do it. So yeah, I feel like the history of the medium, as well as like formally what it enables us to do, it's a combination of both probably, but that's not a very eloquent answer. I'm just like thinking out loud here, but maybe I'll pass it on to Yvonne too.
Yeah, thanks Sam, thanks for the question. I think I think what comics do, what sequential art could do is reach. It tells a story essentially. I don't know, for lack of a better word. I'm a historian, and so I tell stories. There are characters, historical characters, and I think having an illustration is a way to kind of help a reader kind of imagine this plot, this kind of storyline that you're trying to tell through this history, which in a lot of cases I think is really bland, and history could be really dry. And I think a lot of the students, first, second year students that are in one of my classes are usually, they're quick to say history is my least favorite subject. And I think it's the way that history is often taught. And I think when they start kind of seeing their own history in that story, and the campus I'm at is a predominantly Black and brown campus in terms of the whole UC system as a whole. And so when students start seeing this like ethnic history in this California past, right, they're really excited about it. And I think having drawings kind of breaks through that. One other thing I want to say is with the comic version that I had been working on, I was also trying to add footnotes. So the bottom of the page had these like, they were text heavy. And so I was trying to still have it as like an academic, this linear text, like this essay, but also with illustrations. And so I'm still playing around whether I'm going to keep that to kind of play with this like traditional essay style, and then this like graphic component to it. And so yeah, I'm still learning. I'm not an expert by any means, but I'm trying to learn as much as I can. I'm learning about comics and sequential art as I go along. I'm reading the theories behind this, examples, and seeing how others are doing it. I'm by no means an expert, but I love to draw. I've been drawing most of my life, and so it's a way to bring some additional joy or some joy to the PhD.
I love that you brought up joy. Yeah, Sonia, go ahead.
Okay, I absolutely love that last comment of the joy. Yes, absolutely. I think it's so fantastic when the work starts to be you and you are part of the work and you live in the work through the work and it's all connected. I'm looking at the comments here and I see Anne Valk. I hope I'm not butchering your name too badly, but talking about the challenge of the faculty. And that was something that I came into as I was working through my dissertation. How do you evaluate these works? So once you start creating a website and once you start creating graphics, so do you evaluate the quality of the drawing? Do you evaluate the layout of the website? How do you evaluate the editing work that was done by the students? So finding all these different elements that go into writing in creating a multimodal dissertation, and for the faculty to be able to accept the challenge. As I was working through my dissertation, my advisors were extremely supportive, and yet it was still challenging, and I still had to at times butt heads with them in insisting. Ivan was talking about the text heavy aspect of it, because that's still the expectation. And I think Jesse also talked about the need to write the white paper to go with the dissertation. So all these expectations of the writing aspect and how does it intersect with the multimodal aspect. So a lot of questions that, and I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I do get very excited in starting all these conversations.
Yeah, I think that question of joy sounds like it sparked a lot for many folks who are here in the audience as well. Maybe on a more concrete note, there have been a couple of questions about more specific types of like resources and tools and skills and that kind of thing. Maybe we can have this as one last like technical, concrete type question and then end on a few last comments. I know that each of your stories is a bit different. Some of you came into your projects with skills that you had already developed in other contexts. For others of you, you were learning new things. Does anyone want to chime in on ways that you found either resources to develop the skills that you need, or who you turned to for that type of support, how that fit into your dissertation process in general? I know there's always a concern about like how to do so many things, you know, it's hard to do everything.
I can jump in. You know, it's interesting, like the work I do now is also collaborative, and I find that like all the great projects I work on, the majority of them are collaborative. So it was so strange to be in that like siloed endeavor where you're just kind of working on your own. And it feels like you can't reach out as much for those technical aspects because it is your like capstone project. It is yours. It's supposed to be your work. So I undertook the audio recording and editing. I did all the graphics. I made these player, you know, icons and logos, and I did all of the, you know, I made a video to like walk you through how to play the game. So I was like learning all these new skills. Some of them I brought with me. Fortunately, my background was in web design and development, so that was natural. And I've had experience with audio and video editing, but putting all that together and having to do all those things was sometimes that mountain seemed too high. It caused a lot of stress, and towards the end, it was almost crippling in a way that it just, you know, some days it would just paralyze me and I felt like I couldn't move forward. It was just too many things to do in too many different modes that it was just overwhelming. So I feel like part of this dissertation experience is that it is this kind of self-centered endeavor. And when you get out into work in academia, everything is collaborative and people are working together, and you rely on designers to do good design. And you rely on developers to do background development, and you have a project manager, and all those aspects are so important. But to do them all, I don't know that to kind of respond in a long way to this question, I don't know that there is that support available. I mean, of course, we can talk to people we know who have expertise in certain areas, but I did find that I had to challenge myself more often to learn the skills, and that was all self-taught. I really did that all on my own. So that was a lot of extra labor, invisible labor too. And without the white paper, I don't know that any of that would have been even recognized by a lot of people. So truly a challenge.
Yeah, I think the question of scope is a really, really hard one. And it's so easy for projects to spin larger and larger as you go on, as opposed to getting tighter and tighter. One thing that I know we're at time, so I'm going to just wrap this up quickly, but one thing that I tend to encourage people to think about is think about the question that you're trying to address. What is it that you really want to explore, and let the skills come from that, from what you really feel like you need to do in order to communicate X, Y, or Z, rather than thinking, oh, it's going to be great for me on the job market if I know how to do X. And so I'd love to do a video documentary because I think video editing skills are going to be really useful for me. I think that flips it the other way. So when you feel, really engaged in the project already, it feels more natural to look for those skills that you need and to develop them over time.
Katina, can I respond? I'm so sorry. I totally hear your comment on the ableist metaphors. I apologize for that. I did not mean any disrespect. And I completely agree that is I can be more aware of the descriptors I use. So thank you for pointing that out.
It slips into speech so commonly, and it's something I've been watching for myself. So thanks for hearing that. Well, we're at time. So I want to thank everyone so much for being here on at least what here in Brooklyn is a really sunny Friday afternoon. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Huge thanks to Sean and to everybody working behind the scenes at HASTAC. I know exactly how much work these take to put together. Thank you to Glenn for making this project possible. Sean, did you want to say a couple words to wrap us up? I don't know if you have any announcements or anything like that.
Sure, thanks, Katina. First off, I wanted to thank all the presenters. Thank you for leading us through this conversation. It was really inspiring. I'm not sure if y'all were monitoring the chat, but there was just a lot of excitement and inspiration drawn from your project. So thank you all for sharing your work. For myself, I'm always thinking about how to liberate the resources in academia to make the knowledge that we are kind of building and sharing accessible to the communities that we work in. And I really feel like the work that you're doing is really kind of building those bridges. So thank you for your work. For folks, I just wanted to give 2 shout outs for upcoming events that we have coming up. Next Friday, the Futures Initiative is hosting the first of our series of University Worth Fighting For events. It's titled Is Graduate School For Me? And that's next Friday, March 25th at 3 p.m. And then the following Friday, April 1st, is the first of our lightning round talks presented by our HASTAC scholars. It'll be April 1st from 3 to 4 p.m. And we have 5 HASTAC scholars who will be sharing a bit of their work or their pedagogy. So I'm going to drop those links in the chat in case folks are interested. And yeah, thank you again, everybody, for taking some time out to join us today. I will also drop my email into the chat in case anybody has specific questions about HASTAC or HASTAC scholars. I'd love to chat with you more then. Thanks, everybody. I mentioned before that we've recorded this event. I'm going to stop the recording right now. But we'll share this recording with y'all if you would like, as soon as we get it edited and in a shareable format. I don't have anything else, but thank you all so much for your time and your knowledge and your wonderful work.